All right, Kid Summer's already getting used to retirement life. 2 o'clock on a normal day, he's at home. Kid, how does it feel to hang it up after all these years, my friend?
Last week, which was my last week, was I'll admit it was a little melancholy, for sure. This week for two days, it's just kind of like being on vacation so far. It hasn't really hit home. So, like I was teasing my wife yesterday. I came out of the office and told her I was bored, and she just kind of rolled her eyes.
What do you do next?
That's a good question. I've got some family things coming up in March and April that I'll be traveling for. So I'm just going to take a few months and not do much of anything except family stuff, and then kind of see where it leads. I'm hoping have maybe a few freelance opportunities down the road, but yeah, mostly enjoy family. Got a fourth grandchild on the way. Enjoy those guys, and not schedule my life around a sporting event anymore.
Congratulations, that's well deserved. Kid, when you did it for as long as you did it, what comes to mind when you look back at your career? Do you reflect yet? Do you give that some time? What comes to mind?
Yeah, first overall, just thankful that I was able to work 41 years in the newspaper, print, media business. A lot of people more talented than I am, had were victims of buyouts and layoffs and had to pursue other things. And luckily I avoided those things. And also just thankful. I mean, I covered a lot of cool stuff in 38 years. Two NBA championship series with the Suns, the Cardinals in the Super Bowl. I never thought I'd cover that. Covered some Final Fours, a lot of big events, but a lot of smaller events and news stories that were a lot of fun to do too. I mean, Grand Canyon won a national championship in basketball in 1988. I got to cover that. Mesa Community College made a run in a national junior college basketball tournament in '87. I got to cover that. A lot of high school, a lot of memorable high school games and moments, especially as I started my career at the Republic. So it's, very, very fortunate.
Do you remember your first story? And what was your last story?
Ooh, my first story. That's a good question. I started in April, and back then we had community sections in the Republic, and I was the sports person in the Northwest community section. One of the very first stories I did was on a boxer out of downtown Phoenix, really close to the newspaper office, a guy who later became pretty famous, Michael Carbajal. I think I might have been one of the first people to do a story on him, training in sort of a shed in his backyard and being trained by his brother. That was one of the first stories I did. The last column I did, like other than a farewell column that ran in last Sunday's paper, was probably the Cardinals hiring new coach Jonathan Gannon. I think he was the 9th or 10th new Cardinals coach I wrote about since they moved here in 1988.
All right, so maybe one sticks now, finally, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, those coaching searches. I got kind of used to writing about those, and trying to break that story. So we'll see. It's a kind of a more of a delayed Cardinal search than we'd ever seen before. This is the latest they've named a head coach. Some people turned him down. Some people turned him down for second interviews. We'll see. Maybe he turns out to be has a nice run like Ken Wisenhunt did for a while, or Bruce Arians did for a while. He's saying all the right things for sure, and he impressive in his opening press conference. But I'm not that means a whole lot.
Yeah, you've seen them come and go. It's a long list of them. I would ask you to name them, but we'd be here too long. And I know you could, by the way. You have a favorite story that comes to mind, one that maybe most impactful to you, or a few that come to mind when you think about everything that you've covered?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think of maybe some of the more offbeat stories I did over the years. I did a story in this little Farmington community farming community near Buckeye. It's called, I think it's called Arlington, Arizona. And the principal superintendent one year, I had a bunch of dirt from some construction projects, and he got a tractor and moved it around and built a little golf course on campus these kids who weren't really exposed to golf could come play golf, which was really cool. One year I did a story on how Japanese Americans who were imprisoned during World War II in Arizona, built a baseball field and organized a league. And, that sort of, was able to give them some sense of normalcy, if that was even possible, during their imprisonment. A couple of years ago, I did a story on a Arizona Christian football player that the NAIA wasn't going to allow him to wear a shield, and he had an eye condition that made him very sensitive to light. So I was able to write that column, and the NAIA quickly gave him a pass and said, yeah, you can wear that. So those are some of the impactful stories. It was fun as a Cardinal beat writer, covering the run to the Super Bowl. And that was a interesting team to cover, with Kurt Warner and Larry Fitzgerald and guys like Darnell Dockett and Anquan Bolden. A lot of big personalities, and a team that, as late as December looked like it was headed nowhere. So that was a fantastic time too.
Yeah, just curious, what's so funny
about that?
No, I often think.
Oh yeah. My part in Derek Anderson Monday Night Meltdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was cool about that story? It wasn't fun in the moment at all. I remember thinking, as this goes on, this is in itself going to be a story. But what was neat was, several years later, when Derek was a backup with the Panthers and they went to the Super Bowl, I covered him, and I went and did a story with him and kind of revisited with him that whole episode after that game, that Monday night game against the 49ers. So, and he was pretty good talking about it. So if there was any bad feelings between us at that point, they kind of went away with the story. Not that we hugged it out or we're ever going to be friends or anything, but the story had a pretty neat ending.
Kent, what do you hope people got out of your writing over the years? What do you hope people remember? I'm very thankful for me. Like, when I got here, you were always very welcoming. I saw Darren's piece too as well about you. I don't know if you read that, but I mean, what do you hope people took away from your writing all these years?
Well, and my parents instilled this, that, integrity is something you don't compromise. And that means being fair to everybody. It means, being honest with everybody. So I hope people saw that. One, I hope they enjoyed the writing. I always thought sports pages should not only inform, but entertain, and maybe inject a little humor here and there. And I hope, in a lot of days, I hope I was able to take people sort of behind the scenes with the players and the teams that I covered, and gave them a glimpse of maybe what their lives were like in normal times, or able to, explain what went into a decision, or what went into a play, and maybe give them something that they, couldn't get from watching it on television.
Take us behind the scenes of your life. What was it like for 41 years?
Oh, it was a blast. It really was. I had so much fun. I mean, there are things to complain about being in this business, and believe me, I've complained about them, working on holidays and sort of odd hours, or you've got a family thing scheduled I remember going to a movie with my family on the day the Cardinals signed Kurt Warner, and having to turn around and go home and write that story. So, those kind of things, are what will stick with me.
And this valley has changed so much, Kent, since you got here. Just take us through that ride. What did it look like when you got here? What does it look like now?
Yeah, I mean, I came in 1985 and newly married, and I've had the same job and the same wife for 38 years. So the valley changed a ton. I mean, when I came here, the big beats were Arizona State, and the Phoenix Suns. Those were the two things we hung our hat on around here. And, and then to see, the Cardinals come in 1988, that was a huge story. And then just grow, with the Diamondbacks and hockey and et cetera, and spring training has just, blossomed over the years and become such a big deal. So, and just the sheer number of high schools those have increased so much. I can't even keep up with how many high schools there are, and how many of them have desert or mountain in their title. It's just exploded. So it's a far different scene. And it was really cool because, you came here and it was really, sort of, you felt like you were on the frontier of a burgeoning sports city. So it's really been special to be a part of that in some small way as someone who told stories and covered games.
I can see it now. Kent Summers High School at Desert Vista Valley Road.
God, let's hope not.
Kid, do you have a favorite athlete that you covered?
Ooh, a lot of guys. Larry Centers, the Cardinals fullback. The year they went to the playoffs for the first time in Arizona in 1998. He was just a blast. I was an Arizona State football writer when Jake Plummer first played his first games as a freshman. That was pretty cool. Larry Fitzgerald, of course, to see him from someone who came into the league at age 20, had a reputation those early days as not really that hard of a worker. And to see him grow as people pushed him and he was mature enough to listen to advice into a Hall of Fame receiver. Kurt Warner was a dream to cover. One of the few guys, he pop his head into the press room at the end of the day and say, you guys got everything you need from me. I'm sorry I had to cut off a press conference a little earlier, earlier in the day. So Carson Palmer was the same way, tremendous. Lots of guys. It's been I've got to cover some true characters too. From Bill Frieder to Buddy Ryan to Dennis Green. Just true characters. And you went to work each day not quite knowing, not quite being able to predict what might happen.
Buddy Ball was the first one where you really didn't know what was going to happen, right? Didn't he stand on a box? Was the box there, right?
Yeah, he was so short, to put him up and make it easier for everybody. They built a buddy box. Sean Rashow, was a Cardinals media relations intern. He and his dad built the buddy box, and Buddy, one day he might accuse or, make a veiled comment about how his starting quarterback was a cancer on the team and he was the damn doctor who was going to cut the cancer out, to Dennis Green and the stuff he came up with in press conferences and just pretty amazing times, and cover the 93 Suns a little bit in the playoffs, spend a week in Chicago while they played 3 games there. And you're around Charles Barkley every day, and so I got to witness that phenomenon. It was, like I said, I could go on, and I'm going to leave some people out for sure, some guys who helped me a ton along the way.
Well, I was just about to say, get you out here on this. Is there advice that has always stuck with you throughout the years, and any advice you want to give the next generation?
I think twofold is if you're really a news reporter, dig for the story, but also be fair. Give the team or the player you're covering a chance to respond. Get both sides of the story. I think would be one, and two is hard questions aren't necessarily fun to ask, but it's our job to ask them. And I think we all could do a better job of asking those in press conferences. I hope I did on occasion, because I think the real fans, want to know those things. And I think I got a lot of nice emails from fans saying, thank you for asking the tough questions all those years. And I know you do that, Cam. I appreciate that about the way you cover everything around here. But I guess those would be my 2 pieces of advice, and to have some fun along the way too.
Thank you for that, Ken. And have some fun is definitely a good thing for all of us, because you're right. The grind, the schedules, the holidays, they can add up a little bit. Anybody you want to thank that you haven't yet? And I'm sure you'll get back to everybody, but is there anybody that you've been meaning to?
You know, I go back, my younger years, and these people, most of these people have passed on, but the guy who hired me, Bob Jacobson, the first sports editor, Lloyd Herberg, who was our first Cardinals beat writer, really taught me what a beat writer should do and how much you had to care. Steve Schoenfeld, our first NFL writer, the same way. Bob Young, who is still with us, but he covered Arizona State before I did. He covered the Suns during those Barkley years. Just as good a reporter as I've ever been around. I learned a lot from him, and just on and on, and people across the country. I tried to read a lot of different writers and sort of learned what I liked and what I didn't, and so many guys and women too that I really looked up to. So there's a ton of people who have helped me over the years.
Thank you notes, Kent. It's just like after your wedding, you just got to start writing them. You know what I mean, man?
Yeah.
Long list of them too. Real quick, Coop is also retired. He's bored at home, Kent. So if you need a buddy, pick up the phone, call Coop, and I guarantee you, he'll talk your ear off, because he talks my ear off for an hour daily. And I just can't keep doing that at night, in the morning, if he's up. So if you need a buddy, he's at home, and he'd be more than happy to answer the phone.
That's good to know. I might take you up on that.
You golf, or what do you think you'll fill your time?
I used to golf, and then I sort of quit out of frustration and the time demanded, and so I'm thinking about dusting the clubs off and maybe starting up again, break up some scar tissue, and and see if I enjoyed the game more than I did when I sort of gave it up about 10 years ago.
There we go. Maybe pickleball. Something,
maybe
right?
Pickleball. Maybe pickleball. That seems to be the thing now, right?
Yep. Ken, as always, thanks for the time, buddy.
Thanks, Cam.